Hey everyone, welcome back to Talk Tickers. Now you all know we usually spend our time here dissecting earnings calls, but today we are hitting pause on the spreadsheets to dive into something a little different, a major shakeup in the EV world, the bankruptcy filing of Northvolt.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation. On one hand, you have Europe pushing aggressively for electric vehicles with these ambitious targets, yet their supposed champion for a homegrown battery industry just took a massive hit.
Right. It is pretty shocking considering Northvolt raised over $10 billion since 2016. They had these major partnerships with Volkswagen and Goldman Sachs. Everything seemed to be pointing towards success. So how did we get to Chapter 11?
Well, a key factor is the sheer difficulty of scaling battery production to meet the demand of a rapidly growing EV market. Building a few batteries in a lab is one thing, but mass production is an entirely different beast. And there were reports of missed internal targets and quality control issues, indicating they may have struggled with that transition.
That makes sense. We've seen this happen before with other companies that experience explosive growth. It's like comparing baking a cake at home to running a massive bakery. The complexity and challenges are on a whole other level.
Exactly. And to complicate matters, the EV market itself hasn't grown as rapidly as some analysts predicted. While demand is increasing, it's not the hockey stick growth that many were betting on. And this puts financial pressure on all the players in the supply chain, especially those still trying to establish themselves.
And of course, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, China. They control a massive 85% of global battery cell production. And it's not just about market share, but also about the years of government support access to critical raw materials and the economies of scale they've built up. All of this makes it incredibly tough for European companies to compete on price.
Absolutely. This situation raises a critical question about Europe's overall EV strategy. If they can't secure a reliable, cost-effective battery supply, their ambitious goals for transitioning away from internal combustion engines are at serious risk. This dependence on China also creates strategic vulnerabilities, particularly given the current geopolitical climate.
So while Europe is trying to break free from dependence on foreign oil, they might end up reliant on China for batteries. That's quite a trade-off. Let's unpack Northvolt's downfall a bit further, because this wasn't an overnight implosion. There were signs of trouble brewing, weren't there?
Yes, and one of the most glaring was the loss of a major contract with BMW back in June. A €2 billion deal vanished overnight. This signaled that even established automakers were hedging their bets and not putting all their eggs in the European battery basket.
Losing a contract of that size is a major blow, no doubt about it. It also raises concerns about whether Northvolt was able to keep up with the technological advancements and cost efficiencies of their Chinese competitors.
Indeed. And that brings us to another major challenge Northvolt faced: the intense competition from established Asian battery manufacturers like CATL and BYD. These companies have a decade-long head start, aggressive expansion strategies, and as we discussed, significant cost advantages.
So you have this perfect storm brewing. Northvolt is trying to scale production rapidly while navigating a slower than expected EV market, facing fierce competition from Chinese giants. And then they lose a crucial contract. It's no wonder they stumbled. But was this just an isolated incident, or is it a sign of a wider problem in the European battery scene?
Unfortunately, it appears to be part of a broader trend. At least 8 other European companies have delayed or completely abandoned their EV battery projects. Just this year, we're talking about a projected decrease in production capacity of 176 gigawatt hours, which is nearly equivalent to all of Europe's existing battery production capacity. That's a huge setback.
176 gigawatt hours.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective for our listeners, imagine the entire battery production capacity of Europe just disappearing. That's the scale of the issue here. And it highlights a fundamental challenge. Europe is trying to build its battery industry practically from scratch, while China is already miles ahead operating at full speed.
It's a David and Goliath situation, and right now Goliath has all the advantages. This raises a critical question: can Europe really catch up? Or are they destined to be reliant on China for their EV future? It's a daunting challenge, to say the least. But I think it's crucial to understand the intricacies of battery technology itself. Before we jump to conclusions about Europe's chances, building a battery isn't like assembling a piece of furniture. It requires incredibly precise control over complex chemical processes.
Yeah, I was reading about that. It sounds like making batteries, especially at the scale needed for EVs, is more like microchip manufacturing than traditional car assembly.
That's a great comparison. You're dealing with incredibly sensitive materials and reactions, temperature, humidity, even the purity of the raw materials. Everything has to be perfect. Any slight deviation can affect the battery's performance, longevity, and even safety.
So we're talking about a very high-tech manufacturing process. And on top of that,
Yeah.
there's this whole alphabet soup of battery chemistries, LFP, NMC, NCA, each with its own advantages and drawbacks.
Exactly. And each car manufacturer might have specific requirements and preferences for their vehicles. So a battery maker like Northvolt needs to be incredibly flexible and adaptable to meet those diverse demands. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
It sounds like trying to be a master chef who can whip up any dish on the menu, from a simple pasta to a complex souffle, all while managing a packed restaurant. And while they're doing all that, they also have to keep costs down to compete with those Chinese mega factories,
Right.
churning out batteries at incredibly low prices.
A perfect analogy. It's no wonder Northvolt faced such immense pressure. And let's not forget the constant push for innovation in this industry. Everyone is racing to develop the next big thing, like solid-state batteries, which have the potential to revolutionize the EV market.
Solid-state batteries, right? Those have been the holy grail of battery technology for a while now. What makes them so special? And is Europe in a position to lead the charge in that area?
Well, solid-state batteries have several key advantages over traditional lithium-ion batteries. They're potentially safer because they don't use flammable liquid electrolytes. They can store more energy in the same space, meaning longer driving ranges for EVs, and they can potentially charge much faster, addressing one of the biggest concerns for EV adoption.
So faster charging, longer range, and potentially safer. That sounds like a winning combination. But are those just theoretical advantages? Or are we close to seeing them in mass-produced vehicles?
Several companies are making significant progress, but the technology is still in its early stages. There are significant manufacturing challenges to overcome before we see widespread adoption, and that's where the race for innovation gets even more intense.
So it's not just about making batteries. It's about constantly innovating and pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And in that race, Europe is clearly lagging behind. But if they're so committed to electric vehicles, why aren't they doing more to support their own battery makers? Why not just throw a ton of money at the problem?
Well, there's definitely a debate raging in Europe right now about the role of government support. Some argue that Europe needs to take a page from the US playbook and offer more generous subsidies and incentives, like those provided by the Inflation Reduction Act. They argue that it's a matter of strategic importance for Europe to have its own battery industry.
Because if they don't, they become reliant on imports. And in a world where supply chains are increasingly weaponized, that's a risky proposition, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you consider the current geopolitical tensions.
Exactly. It's not just about batteries themselves. It's about the entire value chain, mining the raw materials, refining them, manufacturing the components. China currently controls a significant portion of that chain, and Europe needs to catch up.
So what are the options here? What can Europe realistically do to boost its battery industry and become a major player in this global game? More subsidies, more research funding. What's the recipe for success?
Well, financial support is definitely part of the equation, but it's also about creating a more favorable regulatory environment, streamlining permitting processes for new factories, and investing heavily in research and development to push the boundaries of battery technology.
Right now, it seems like it takes years to get all the necessary approvals to build a factory in Europe. It's like trying to run a marathon in quicksand. You put in all the effort, but the red tape just bogs you down.
Exactly. Europe needs to create a more agile and responsive system that encourages innovation and investment. And beyond just throwing money at the problem, they need to invest strategically, focusing on areas where they can potentially leapfrog the competition, like next-generation battery technologies or sustainable manufacturing processes.
And let's not forget about the human element. You need the best engineers, scientists, and researchers. To compete in this high-tech game, Europe needs to make itself a magnet for talent, offering competitive salaries, world-class research facilities, and a thriving innovation ecosystem.
Absolutely. It's not just about building factories. It's about building an ecosystem that attracts and nurtures the best minds in the field.
So it sounds like Europe is facing a monumental task.
Yep.
Can they really pull this off? Or are they destined to play second fiddle to China in the EV battery race?
It's a crucial question, and one that will have significant implications for the global EV market and the future of transportation, and that's precisely what we'll explore in our final segment.
All right, Talk Ticker listeners, we've spent this episode dissecting the collapse of Northvolt and the challenges facing Europe's battery ambitions. It's a complex situation with a lot of moving parts. So as we wrap things up, let's try to answer the million-dollar question. Can Europe actually catch up in the EV battery race, or are they destined to be permanently reliant on China?
It's certainly a steep uphill climb, even with Northvolt restructuring. There's a lot of uncertainty about whether Europe can establish a truly independent and competitive battery industry, but I wouldn't say all hope is lost.
Okay, so you're saying there's still a chance, but they need to make some serious moves,
Yeah.
right? What would a winning strategy look like for Europe in this situation?
Well, throwing money at the problem isn't enough. Europe needs to be strategic about where it invests and focuses its efforts. One approach could be specializing in niche areas where they have existing strengths. For example, Europe has a long history of expertise in high performance and luxury vehicles. They could focus on developing cutting-edge batteries specifically tailored to those segments.
That's an interesting angle. Instead of trying to compete head-on with China in every market, find your niche and dominate it.
Exactly. Leverage those existing strengths and expertise. Another area where Europe could differentiate itself is sustainability. They've been a leader in environmental regulations and could focus on building a green battery industry with an emphasis on recycling, responsible sourcing of raw materials, and minimizing their carbon footprint.
That makes a lot of sense. Consumers are becoming more and more conscious of the environmental impact of their choices.
Hmm.
A truly green battery could be a major selling point, especially for European consumers.
Absolutely. It's about aligning their battery industry with their values and priorities. And let's not forget the importance of talent. Europe needs to become a magnet for the best engineers, scientists, and researchers in the battery field. They need to create an environment where innovation thrives and where top talent wants to work and live.
So it's a multifaceted challenge. It's about smart investments, strategic focus, a supportive regulatory environment, and attracting top-tier talent. No small feat, that's for sure.
It's a complex equation, and there's no easy solution, but the stakes are incredibly high. The decisions Europe makes in the next few years will have far-reaching consequences, not just for their automotive industry, but for
Right.
their overall economic competitiveness and their place in the global EV revolution.
All right, Talk Tickers listeners, that's our deep dive into the collapse of Northvolt and the state of play in the European battery landscape. It's a story we'll be following closely because the outcome has huge implications for the future of the EV market, not just in Europe, but globally. As always, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Europe can catch up? Is there a path to success? Head over to our website or social media channels and join the conversation. Until next time, keep those tickers talking.